started now. We'll probably have a few more people hopping in at some point. So, did you guys manage to get through chapter 4? A little bit shorter, but as always, lots going on.
Hi.
Hey, Vina, how's it going?
Pretty good.
All right. So, chapter 4, uh, relatively short, but a lot going on in there. As always, let me just go ahead and share. All right. So, back into our detective story. Chapter 4, Crying of Lot 49. The chapter begins, though she saw Mike Fallopian again and did trace the text of the courier's tragedy a certain distance, these follow-ups were no more disquieting than other revelations. There it is again, which now seemed to come crowding in exponentially. So she's starting to get flooded with revelations, or maybe just paranoid delusions, who knows? As if the more she collected, the more would come to her until everything she saw, smelled, dreamed, remembered would somehow come to be woven into the Tristero. So, what do you guys think? I can't help but notice that this weaving keeps coming up and harkens back to that painting that she saw with the women in the tower who were weaving the world itself. You guys remember that? I actually put that picture in here somewhere again. Oh, yeah, right here. Just the right place for it. Um, she is weaving a new world for herself, maybe, or um, at the very least, a new perception of the world. Uh, Under the symbol, she'd copied off the latrine wall of the scope. Hello, hello.
Hello, Jason. Sorry I'm late.
That's all right. So under the symbol, she'd copied off the latrine wall of the scope into her memo book. She wrote, "Shall I project a world?" So I thought this was an interesting uh, choice of words. And um, this is what the director of the play more or less told her what he was. He was the projector, right? He was the dark, actually, I think that's in this section, the dark projector in the planetarium, right? He's projecting all the stars, and she takes exactly that imagery. Um, the idea of projecting the world is a contentious one. It could merit a lot of discussion. Um, there's, in general, an idea you might call constructivism that says that you actually create your, okay, I mean, it's more or less accepted as the truth, but that you more or less create the world that you experience. I think this has come up before in this reading group, that discussion of how your perception of things is more or less a very complicated illusion played on you by your brain. But anyway, not to get too far off course here. Shall I project a world? If not project, then at least flash some arrow on the dome. So this would be the dome inside of the planetarium to skitter among the constellations and trace out your dragon, whale, Southern Cross, anything might help. So looking for patterns, right? This is apophenia, pareidolia, looking through the stars to find these pictures. Um, so in this chapter, she decides she's going to set herself to getting more involved, getting closer to Inverarity's properties and business dealings and so on. So the first thing she does in that regard is to go visit Yoyodyne. If you'll recall, Yoyodyne is the weapons manufacturer um, that he has some large stake in, I think a controlling stake in that company. Um, It was some such feeling that got her up early one morning to go to a Yoyodyne stockholders meeting. There was nothing she could do at it, but she felt it might redeem her a little from inertia. Uh, they gave her a round white visitor's badge at one of the gates. She parked in an enormous lot next to a Quonset building. I hadn't heard that term before, uh, but I know the building. When I saw the picture, there's sort of this, it looks like a hobbit house, if you guys know what I mean. It's a it's an arched building and made of corrugated metal. That's like the metal with the waves in it. At least these big warehouse type ones. Um, yeah, it's kind of like it's like a half of a cylinder. It's like if you took a cylinder and cut it in half and then put it flat, that would be the building. So painted pink and about 100 yards long. It's interesting that it's painted pink for a number of reasons. The weapons manufacturer, it's not a color you typically associate with weapons manufacturers. Um, it's funny to think about. Um, I'm hesitant to get into further interpretations of the long pink building, but really, like, there's just a lot that could be there. Um, the routine business took an hour. This is the routine business is the lunch. She goes in there and it's a big cafeteria and they're all eating lunch. Um, Interestingly, it's referred to that the servants are all black servants bringing out all the food for everyone. Um, the routine business took an hour. For another hour, the shareholders and proxies and company offers held a Yoyodyne Song Fest to the tune of Cornell's alma mater. I'm not sure what that exact song is. I should have looked it up. Uh, so I've included these couple of songs. High above the LA freeways and the traffic's whine stands the well-known Galactronics branch of Yoyodyne. It's just funny that these guys are engaging in this kind of camaraderie at a huge weapons manufacturing corporation. It's kind of like a pledge of allegiance, really. Uh, to the end, we swear undying loyalty to you. Pink pavilions bravely shining, palm trees tall and true. So, yeah, a pledge of allegiance to the weapons manufacturing company. This is the kind of thing that so many large companies historically would try to get their employees to really take a kind of personal, make a personal stake in the company uh, without, just offering them uh, stocks or something. When I was younger, I worked for a little bit at AT&T, and they had seminars where AT&T, by the way, that's American Telephone and Telegraph. It's the first phone company. Um, they had seminars where they would try to teach you the history of AT&T, and it was complete with cataclysm because in the 1980s, AT&T was sued by the government for antitrust issues because AT&T had a virtual monopoly on telephone calls in the US at that time, including domestic and international calling. So the lawsuit broke them up into holding companies called the Bell companies that still exist today. There's Bell South, etc. Um, they're regional, like Bell South, Bell Northeast, and so on. And anyway, the whole point of me telling you this is when they teach you about it, they call that event, the lawsuit, they call it the divestiture. And in the literature, it's in capital letters. It's like they're teaching you their mythology. It's like, and then one day, the great divestiture happened, and it's in capital letters. So it really struck a chord with me. Uh, they didn't make us recite any songs, but it's certainly a place that was designed around trying to make you feel like you're part of a big story and part of a big family, and also that you don't have to leave at all because you could pretty much live on the premises. There's a big cafeteria and like so on. Later companies like Google further perfected that model where they, pretty much make it that you can work on your own projects while you're at work and maybe they'll buy them from you. Anyway, um, it goes on to mention the song done by Clayton Bloody Chicklets. Now, that's an extremely um, I don't think anybody did anybody recognize what that means? It's very particular. I doubt anybody would recognize it. Chiclets were, I think they still exist, a kind of uh, gum like candy, and they come in all colors, but originally they were just white and they look like teeth. Not intentionally. They're not made to look like teeth. They're like little squares, right? And so there was always this threat that people would give uh, bloody chiclets. Like, how would you like a mouthful of bloody chiclets? It's like, how would you like to be punched in the mouth? So bloody chiclets would be like little bloody teeth. So very, very particular reference. Mr. Clayton Bloody Chiclets, that's his name. And he's the president of Yo-Yo Die. Yes, I started to call you Vishnya. Yes, Vasilia. Your name now says Vishnya, by the way.
My mom is called Vishnu.
I figured. Or your
Uh,
sister.
well, bloody chiclets, that gum chiclets
Yeah.
is actually when is in mouth, it is like blood, like
No,
red.
no. It's just a thing that people used to say, like, "How would you like a mouthful of bloody chiclets?" Referring to your actual teeth. It was like a threat, like a funny threat that people would say, "Ha ha ha! How would you like a mouthful of bloody chiclets?" Or the ground was covered in bloody chiclets, written into like a story. So no, they don't have any special color. In fact, they're a relatively plain spearmint or peppermint gum. Okay. So yes, to the tune of Ara Lee. The song Ara Lee you've probably recognized as the song Love Me Tender by Elvis Presley. That's the exact song. He like just took that tune and made. You guys know what I'm talking about? Love me tender, love me true. That one.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the song Ara Lee. So I can kind of get the way that this is supposed to sound. Bendix guides the warheads in, Avco builds them nice. That would be the song here. Douglas North American, Grumman get their slice. Their slice would be their slice of the profits. Martin launches off a pad Lockheed from a sub. We can't get the research and development on a Piper Cub. Convair boosts the satellite into orbits round. Boeing builds the Minuteman. We stay on the ground. Yo-yo dine, contracts flee thee yet. DOD has shafted thee out of spite, I bet. Okay, so that's the song. These are weapons companies, actual weapons companies. Martin, Lockheed, Grumman, and so on. And Minutemen are missiles. These are war weapons and vehicles that they're talking about. So they're very happy to be in this work. Yes, Vasilia?
Douglas, North American and Grumman and Lockheed, they make planes.
Yes, they make planes, but they also make missile guidance systems, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think they make actual missiles. Um, but these guys, they all work together. They're all making parts for the same kinds of things. Um, so yes, Oedipa gets lost during this tour. She finds herself wandering through the maze. um, and she comes across a Minotaur. Not really. Uh, she comes across Stanley Kotex. It says then by accident, of course, Dr. Hilarious would tell her This is interesting the way it's phrased. Dr. Hilarious, if asked, would accuse her of using subliminal cues in the environment to guide her to Stanley Kotex. It's I had to think about that for a sec. Why would he accuse her of being basically subliminally guided? It's accuse is a strange choice of words, but anyway. So then, by accident or howsoever, she came on Stanley Kotex, who wore wire rim bifocals, sandals, argyle socks, and at first glance seemed too young to be working here. As it turned out, he wasn't working, just doodling with a fat felt pencil. This sign, hey, there it is. It's our trumpet. So she says, aha, a clue. And it's funny that she just stumbled into this stuff, and this is what starts to really get to her. Yeah, go ahead. Did somebody say something? Mhm. Okay. So yes, the sign again appears. Oedipa beguiles her way into conversation with Stanley. She tells him that she's a stockholder, and she's prodding him and kind of trying to get information out of him. And she's very clever, right? She knows how to work people. Um, when he finds out that she's a stockholder, he says, "See if you can get them to drop their claws on patents. That, lady, is my axe to grind." So patents, of course, are uh, protections for intellectual property. This seems very prescient to me. It seems very similar to things that are happening these days. He says that patents for people who work at Yoyodyne, when they sign the contract, they also sign away the patent rights to any inventions they might come up with in the future. So um, now I mentioned before that Google buys intellectual property from their employees all the time and encourages them to develop at work. Um, it's not quite this coercive, right? This is much more, let's say, brutal. You basically sign away the rights to your future intellectual property. Although, if you want to go down a rabbit hole at some point, Google did actually do a lot to loosen patent protections in the US, starting in the mid-teens, like early to mid-teens, and Google has done a lot of damage to the patent system in the US, just in order to make patents challengeable in court, so they could maybe get a hold of them. But anyway, we're not going to get into that here. So he says this stifles your really creative engineer. That's what Kotex says, bitterly, wherever he may be. So Kotex has things he'd like to invent. Oedipus says, cleverly, to poke him forward, to push him forward, I didn't think people invented anymore. She sensed that this would goad him. Goading means uh, egging him on. What's the word? What are those things that the cowboys wear on on their boots? I can't remember. Spurs, spurring them on. So she spurs him on, saying, I mean, who's there been really since Thomas Edison? Oh, don't get me started on that. Uh, isn't it all teamwork now? She remembers that Bloody Chicklets had repeatedly mentioned teamwork. So he's not, Kotex is not happy to hear that. Teamwork, it's one word for it, yeah. What it really is a way to avoid responsibility. It's a symptom of the gutlessness of society, of the whole society. We live in a society. Um, okay. Anybody have anything to say about this? Uh, interesting. I mean, that's really what corporate law does, like what corporation does. It is a way to avoid any single person in the organization being responsible for or too on the hook for anything. So it divides up risk and it divides up responsibility. I mean, that's why when there are major scandals at corporations, usually nobody goes to jail. It's all like, well, it's a big organization. There's not really anyone to be responsible. These things that inside of the company, it's sort of there can be a kind of mass delusion going on um, that caused the company to do the terrible thing. In this case, though, he's saying that the inventions that come from this so-called teamwork that could be patented uh, should go to the company. So anything you come up with, you're a part of the team, so it should go right to the company. It's when he said this, it's a way for them to avoid responsibility. It seemed like a strange place to bring it up with regard to patents. Responsible for what? Patents? But it immediately made me think of the fact that that is the original rationale for making a corporation, for making an incorporated company, is to divide the risk among all the participants. Okay, and that includes financial risk. Like if you're just putting a bit of money in the form of, buying stocks in the company, then you've only made X amount of risk financially. So it's always that avoiding risk and avoiding responsibility is at the heart of it. Okay. He mentions this John Nefastus as his example of someone who's still inventing things. He says, the Nefastus machine? She only widened her eyes. Well, this was invented by Nefastus, who's up at Berkeley now. John's somebody who still invents things. Here, I have a copy of the patent. So we're going to talk about this in a second, but the concept of this Maxwell's demon is a real thing that we're going to talk about. Actually, I think I have the explanation here. Interesting name, Nefastus. I mean, it sounds like, well, it doesn't sound good. Let's just say nefarious is a similar word. Who's that with the beard? The guy on the machine. The machine has that picture on it, so that's not just artistic license. Of course, the machine is completely made up anyway, but who's that with the beard? She asks. James Clerk Maxwell, explained Kotex, a famous Scotch scientist who had once postulated a tiny intelligence known as Maxwell's demon. Now, it's not for you guys who are might be a little confused about this. He's not literally talking about a demon. There is a tendency in theory and philosophy to think of like a demon as the thing for a thought experiment back then. These days, people say, imagine that there's an AI that does X. But back then, people used to say, imagine there's a demon that does X. More on that in a second. Let me finish this first. The demon could sit in a box among air molecules that were moving at all different speeds and sort out the fast molecules from the slow ones. Fast molecules have more energy, concentrate enough of them in one place, and you have a region of high temperature inside the box. You can then use the difference in temperature between this hot region of the box and any cooler region to drive a heat engine. Since the demon only sat and sorted, you wouldn't have put any real work into the system. So you'd be violating the second law of thermodynamics, which says that you shouldn't be able to have perpetual motion, basically. Getting something for nothing, causing perpetual motion. Sorting isn't work? Okay, so let's clarify this a little bit. This is a real thing, by the way, with apparently a bunch of proofs behind it, so you can even go look it up. An interesting idea and an interesting response by Oedipa, because really the first thing you think is that the verb sort is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that postulation, isn't it? Because the sorting obviously also involves moving those those particles. So there's got to be something else going on. What is sorting? Like sorting, does he use little demon hands or something? Or does he just have mental powers that allow him to move them around? In any case, there's something doing the moving. Sorting is a kind of moving things around. This is going to come up more later, I should mention, because, I mean, we talked about epiphenia and like trying to see patterns in things. That's also a kind of sorting that's going on in your head, trying to make sense of things, uh, is a kind of sorting also. Now, what I was saying a second ago about people back in the day always using demons, you might remember there's a pretty familiar example of Descartes using the idea of maybe there's a demon that's fooling us. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Uh, Descartes said in his, I think, therefore I am. The whole postulation leading up to that was, how do I know that I exist? What because well, when I see things, I could be dreaming, or I could be mistaken, or maybe a demon is fooling me. Uh, but in any case, there's a me, right? No matter which of those examples I choose, that's where he comes to the idea, well, I think, therefore I am. Um, so that's one example. Uh, the modern example of that would be something like maybe you're inside of a big virtual reality machine, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like back then, people would just say maybe there's a demon, and these days people just say, "Oh, imagine you're in a big VR," or imagine there's an algorithm that's doing X, Y, or Z. There's another example. Have you guys heard of Laplace's demon? Laplace's demon also came from physics, and it's another thought experiment where this physicist says, because all of the laws of physics are deterministic, imagine there's a demon that knows the location and the action of every single particle in the universe. That demon would be able to see all the way into the future, right? Completely, and all the way into the past, because he would know what every particle was doing, and therefore, because of the deterministic nature of physics, he would be able to see everything. That's Laplace's demon. Interestingly, okay, I'll stop on this. Interestingly, there's a series that's maybe a little bit dry science fiction series. It's called Devs, and it's literally about exactly that. They never say Laplace's demon, but it's a science fiction television series. Devs, like developers, also like Deus, um, about a machine that does exactly that. It's able to predict the outcome of everything by compiling huge amounts of data. Anyway, so yeah, sorting certainly has to be some kind of work. I mean, it seems pretty apparent on its face. So how does this machine work, the one that was developed in the story? All you have to do is stare at the photo of Clerk Maxwell and concentrate on which cylinder, right or left, you wanted the demon to raise the temperature in. The air would expand and push a piston. Okay, so it's some kind of psychic focus prayer thing. Not everyone can work it, of course. Uh, now that he's getting a bit more relaxed, he says only people with the gift, sensitives, John calls them. Uh, she manages to finagle, like to work the address out of him before he realizes he's being worked for information. Um, yeah, he kind of clams up at some point, where he gives her the address, at least the post office box address of the inventor of that machine. But then he starts to get suspicious of her, and then he says, "I gave you the wrong address." Then she's still trying to get him to keep going, so she's a good detective. Um, then the waste address isn't good anymore, but she pronounced it like a word, the word waste. His face congealed, a mask of distrust. It's WASTE, lady. An acronym, not waste. It's funny because she keeps opening doors and then more doors get opened and like even the word waste that she saw turns out to be 5 words now and she doesn't know what they are. Uh, and we'd best not go into it any further. So he shuts down. He doesn't want to talk to her after that. But she got some good info out of him. Um, Later on, she goes back to the Scope. That's that bar. Um, and she runs into Peter Penguin again. And she's telling him about her day at Yoyodyne. She's talking about her meeting with Kotex. Sure, this Kotex is part of some underground, he told her. An underground of the unbalanced, possibly. But then how can you blame them for being a bit bitter? Look what's happening to them in school. They got brainwashed, like all of us, into believing the myth of the American inventor. Morrison his telegraph, Bell and his telephone, Edison and his light bulb, Tom Swift and his this or that. Only one man per invention. Then when they grow up, they find they have to sign over all their rights to a monster like Yoyodyne. They got stuck on some project or task force or team and started being ground into anonymity. Okay. Kotex shows himself to be quite opposed to Yoyodyne, if anything. Um, any comments here? All right. Metzger, who's there as well, says, "You're so right wing, you're left wing." How can he be against a corporation that wants a worker to waive his patent rights, put aside his patent rights? That sounds like surplus value theory to me, fella. And you sound like a Marxist. As they got drunker, this typical Southern California dialogue degenerated further. Okay, so the further means that Pynchon considers this already degenerate conversation. And this is going to be a running theme. Like we talked before about how you can't really get to the ultimate and final truth of things. And this is a good picture of that. It's a drunken barroom discussion where someone, where does it say? Doesn't it say he wants to argue? Maybe that's in the next line. That, yeah, oh, he wanted to argue. It is there, right there. That's the real reason that he says this. You know, he's not trying to get to the truth. Uh, yes, Vasilia?
Sorry, but what was on the last slide?
On the last slide. On the last slide is what what Penguin says about Kotex. This is Peter Penguin. Later on, when Oedipa goes out to the bar to relax a bit, she runs into Peter and she tells Peter about, if you remember Peter Penguin, he's the guy who's in this. Oh, his name is not Peter Penguin. My bad. That's the name of his organization, the Penguin Society. What was his name again? I've forgotten now. Why am I calling him Peter Penguin? That's not his name. With the Penguin guy. Now I feel like an idiot for not remembering his name. Anyway, she tells.
It was Peter Penguin, I think.
No, that's not his name. That's the name of the guy that they named. No, is it him? Yeah, I guess it is him. I'm getting confused now. What's the name of the guy who tried to attack the California coast for the Confederacy? Now I'm like checking back in my book. Remember? I can't remember.
Yes, I think the society is called Peter Penguin and the person is Fallopian, Mike Fallopian.
Yes, Fallopian. How could you forget a name like that?
Mike Fallopian.
That's it, yeah. She's telling Fallopian, okay, about her experience at Yoyodyne. That's what this slide is. So she tells Fallopian about this Kotex guy who is telling her about that machine and all this. And he's contributing. He's giving his feedback. He says, yeah, he's part of some underground. I mean, because remember, Oedipa is trying to find out about this symbol, and she's trying to find out what this waste organization is, this mysterious organization that seems to be some kind of alternate postal service. So his feedback is surely in reference to that. Sure, he's part of some underground. And in fact, she's going to ask him directly in a minute about the symbol. So yeah, they get into this, the beginnings of a pseudo-political bar argument that doesn't really get anywhere, presumably. I mean, we don't get any more details on it, but it's interesting that the way this is phrased, it's a typical Southern California dialogue. And again, I mean, none of us here thinks that's just a California thing. This happens all the time, especially now. Degenerated further. So that means it's degenerated already. Entropy is going to be a running theme also. There's entropy in communication as well. Entropy is the tendency of things to fall apart and run out of steam as they expand out, to become chaotic, to lose order. She notices a bronze plaque, like some kind of spomenik, historical marker, by that lake that they were sailing on before. The historical marker says, on this site in 1853, a dozen Wells Fargo men battled gallantly with a band of masked marauders in mysterious black uniforms. So again, she randomly finds a clue. We owe this description to a post rider, the only witness to the massacre, who died shortly after. The only other clue was a cross, traced by one of the victims in the dust. To this day, the identities of the slayers remain shrouded in mystery. So she finds another random clue, and it immediately strikes her as, oh, wow, this is that thing that keeps happening to me. This is that thing I keep perceiving. The Wells Fargo these days is known as a huge financial organization, but it was also a delivery service originally in the 19th century. That's how they got started, with delivery and then banking. I mean, those things really back then kind of went hand in hand. If you had the means to safely deliver things over large distances, well, you could certainly make a business out of it. But yeah, Wells Fargo is still around. I'm sure you guys have heard the name before. It's one of the giant institutions. But yeah, the Wells Fargo delivery men fought off a group of mysterious assailants dressed in black. The T across, or the initial T, the same stuttered by Niccolo in the Courier's tragedy. So she immediately thinks about the play, because that's what happened in the play. He said, but here they find just a cross or a T. Apophenia, right? No, it's a T. So she has, let's say, motivated reasoning and motivated perceptions. Yes, Cecilia.
Where she heard for that T?
It's written on the, she didn't hear a T. They said a cross, but she says maybe that cross is actually a T. So on the historical marker, historical spomenik, right? This story is written about these men who were attacked, these delivery men who were attacked and all that was there was a cross on the ground. And so she says, a cross? She says to herself, a cross, or is it a T? Right? So that's where she gets the T, from the spomenik, from the marker, which is also right there by the lake where they were stranded on the island before. So it's all in the same area. I mean, it's all in San Narciso. She goes to get a copy of the play on the recommendation of Driblet. So she goes to Zapp's bookstore. Sorry, I just had a random memory of there were some good bookstores in Florida where I grew up, and they always had weird names. The name Zapp kind of struck me for a second because of that. Zapp came forward out of a pale cone of light, a wand cone of 15-watt illumination, to help her find the paperback Jacobean Revenge Plays. That's the book. It's been very much in demand, he told her. The skull on the cover watched them through the dim light. Did he only mean Driblet? She opened her mouth to ask, but didn't. It was to be the first of many demurs. So to demur is to give way, to not assert yourself. So she doesn't speak up. She demurs. She just lets it go. So now she has her copy of the book. She also, in an effort to get closer to Inverarity's businesses, visits a retirement home called Vesper Haven. Vesper Haven House. She meets in there, sitting in the lobby, watching cartoons, watching what would certainly be Looney Tunes cartoons. An old man named Mr. Toth. Now, Toth is, well, an ancient Egyptian deity. Now, we've had mention of hieroglyphics already in this story. But Mr. Toth is, well, he's not very lucid. But in case you didn't know, Toth is an ancient Egyptian deity depicted as a man with the head of an ibis or a baboon, animals sacred to him. His feminine counterpart was Seshut, and his wife was Mat. He was the god of wisdom, writing, hieroglyphs, science, magic, art, judgment, and the dead. Remember, the Egyptian Book of the Dead was also mentioned. But Mr. Toth, what do you guys make of the fact that he's, well, not very clear, not very lucid? You guys have any thoughts on that? I mean, this god of wisdom.
I'm drunk.
Drunk? I don't think he's drunk. I mean, I think he's drunk on old age and television. And I mean, it seemed to me that that was the commentary that this wisdom is dying. Wisdom is being infiltrated by television signals. He even refers to the television as a kind of evil machine in one of these. I don't know if I put that line up here. But he's there, he's watching Looney Tunes cartoons, the old ones, right? And he's half dreaming, and he keeps mixing up things. When she asks him questions, he mixes up cartoons with reality, with dreams. She introduces herself. He says, I was dreaming about my grandfather, a very old man, at least as old as I am now, 91. So it's a funny thing to say that my grandfather's as old as I am. At least he's at least as old. He has to be at least as old as I am. Maybe a little older. Although when I was a boy, I thought he had been 91 all his life. Now I feel as if I've been 91 all my life. Oh, the stories that man would tell. He rode for the Pony Express back in the Gold Rush days. I learned something new, by the way, looking into this. I never realized that the Pony Express only existed for a year and a half. I did not know that. I thought from the stories that they must have existed for years, but no, they only existed for about a year and a half. He rode for the Pony Express back in the Gold Rush days. His horse was named Adolf. I remember that. Hey guys, don't worry. That was before the other Adolf. As we'll find out, though, it doesn't really matter because this guy was as racist as could be. Uh, did he ever have to fight off desperados? So Oedipa is like, oh wow, a Pony Express connected person. Maybe he has similar stories to the ones that I read on that mural on that monument. He says that cruel old man was an Indian killer. God, the saliva would come out in a string from his lip whenever he told about killing the Indians. He must have loved that part of it. What were you dreaming about him? Oh, that. It was all mixed in with Porky Pig cartoon. So he's watching Looney Tunes. He waved at the tube. The tube is the TV. Comes into your dreams, you know, filthy machine. So yeah, he's referring to the television. But just to remind you, this is Toth. This is Toth calling the television a filthy machine as he sits in a stupor in a retirement home waiting room, half dreaming. Did you ever see the one about Porky Pig and the Anarchist? Incidentally, this is a real cartoon. I looked it up. It's called The Blowout. It's a Porky Pig cartoon, and it does appear to have an anarchist. Of course, they never say anarchist, but he's making bombs, and he goes to a big map, and he has all these X's on the map of places he wants to blow up. Interesting. It's an actual cartoon. You can find a copy with commentary on YouTube. Also, uh, Looney Tunes is starting a YouTube channel, and this cartoon is going to premiere in 3 days. That blows my mind because they're re-releasing really old cartoons. So I found the official Looney Tunes YouTube channel, and I found this cartoon, and it says this cartoon premieres in 3 days. It's from 1936, and it hasn't premiered yet. But I did find another guy commenting on the cartoon. So yeah, this is a real cartoon with Porky Pig and the anarchist, who's he winds up putting on a black cloak so you can't see him and hiding in the shadows. So little did we know that Looney Tunes cartoons contained Tristero. He says a little nonsensically at first, it was mixed in so with the Indians. He tried to remember the dream, the Indians who wore black feathers, the Indians who weren't Indians. Aha, so there is something there. My grandfather told me the feathers were white, but those false Indians were supposed to burn bones and stir the bone black with their feathers to get them black. So here you have in the story these Native Americans who are not Native Americans who are using that black ink from the play basically to make the feathers black. It made them invisible in the night because they came at night. That's how the old man, bless him, knew they weren't Indians. No Indian ever attacked at night. If he got killed, his soul would wander in the dark forever. Heathen. He has to take a swipe at them just at the end. So that means his grandfather does have some story of fighting against some mysterious people who were trying to stop him. Remember, a Pony Express guy. So she's found another clue. Just she keeps finding people with some story that echoes what she's been hearing so far. If they weren't Indians, what were they? A Spanish name, he says. So Tristero, right? A Mexican name. Oh, I can't remember. Did they write it on the ring? He reached down to a knitting bag by his chair and came up with blue yarn, needles, patterns, and finally a dull gold signet ring. So he has this grandfather's ring that he cut from the finger of one of them. So his grandfather cut off the finger of one of these bandits to get the ring. Can you imagine a 91-year-old man so brutal? He was 91 even back then when he did this. He was always 91. Oedipus stared. The device on the ring was the waist symbol. So this is a ring from the 19th century, and it was taken from an aggressor trying to take down a Pony Express rider or group of riders, and he had the waist symbol on his ring. That's a long time span then. This is really turning into something big for her. She went to find, there he is, Fallopian, who should know about the Pony Express because he's writing that book, if you recall. He's writing a book about postal systems and so on. And Wells Fargo, he did, but not about their dark adversaries. So he doesn't have any particular info on these mysterious figures in black. I've had hints, sure. I wrote hints, by the way, are in reference to her asking about the historical marker. Do you know anything about that historical marker? She asks him. He says, I've had hints. I wrote to Sacramento about that historical marker, and they've been kicking it around their bureaucratic morass for months. Someday they'll come back with a source book for me to read. It'll say, old timers remember the yarn about, yarn here means story. Old timers remember the story about whatever happened. Old timers. Real good documentation. This Californiana crap. Californiana. I wonder if that's a typo. No, it could be a thing that somebody would say. It's a good question. Actually, I have to check the other copy because one of my copies has typos in it. The other copy is great. I think
it may be referring to Americana. So
right. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It could be absolutely a thing that somebody would say. Californiana. There is a mythology to California. We'll talk about that. Did we talk about that already? It's a mythology that comes from the fact that people, when there was kind of a historical push to go out west, they were giving away lots of land, trying to get people to go out there. So if you wanted to go to the West Coast in the early days, just to start over, you could completely reinvent yourself. And that spirit stuck with it, you know. Or maybe you were wanted or something. You've done something wrong. You could go out to California and just start a new life, you know, completely build yourself a new you. And you might recognize some of that in modern discussions of California by people in the US, right? Tends to be a more, it's true that the West Coast of the US is a more laid back place, not just California. You know, Washington and Oregon as well. And there's certainly a kind of free spirit attitude that's alive there. And I mean, I'm not even talking about the hippie movement later on. Of course, that's certainly a part of it. Yes, Vasilia.
California, Washington, and Oregon are places I didn't hear.
Well, they're places on the West Coast. And they have on the West Coast of the US. They're on the western side of the US.
Oh.
And I was saying that there's kind of a mythology that has come out of the West Coast. The West Coast is known for being a kind of more laid back place with a different attitude on life. And I was just tracing the origins of that attitude to, you know, people going there to kind of reinvent themselves. So yeah, there was kind of an attitude in California back then that was like, you know, whatever you did before, that's all gone now. You're a new person. You're a Californian. Um, anyway, so yeah, that's certainly still a thing. It's kind of a joke now too. Like people go to New York and try to make it, and it's really competitive and it's hard and expensive and stressful. And then they say, well, just if you don't make it there, go to California and you'll be fine. I mean, you can be a complete idiot and still make it. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I have a license to say that. Okay. Could it have been a rival carrier? Fallopian shrugged. Oedipus showed him the waist symbol, and he shrugged again. It was in the ladies' room right here in the scope, Mike. And of course, he misogynistically replies, women, who can tell what goes on with them? So she shows him the symbol, and she's like, that was in the ladies' room. And he's like, women, am I right? That he gives that kind of response. Maybe he knows more than he's saying, though. We'll see. I mean, he should if he's writing that book. This was kind of an in-joke for Elizabeth, but she couldn't make it tonight. This is Michael Cohen was Trump's former lawyer. So when I heard about Genghis Cohen, I made a Genghis Cohen by finding a picture of Genghis Khan and throwing Michael Cohen's face on it.
Who is that? Her face?
It's Michael Cohen. He's a former lawyer of Donald Trump. It's kind of a joke I was going to make with Elizabeth, but she couldn't make it. So if anybody else recognizes it, it's former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen. Genghis Cohen, the philatelist, that's a person who's really into stamps and stationery, is assisting with the appraisal of some stamps that are in the possession of the Inverarity estate. So when she talks to Genghis Cohen, which I had to look, I couldn't resist looking up to see what he was trying to get at with this. And it turns out he was just joking around with this name because it was funny. That's the limit of the meaning. That's what I'm saying. Sometimes he's just being funny and silly. Other times he's trying to tell you something, and you have to do this apophenia thing. You have to like try to make connections. Wow, maybe this philatelist is a brutal warlord in some sense that we haven't determined yet. So yeah, he's looking at some stamps. She goes to the apartment slash office, and she sees him framed in a long succession or train of doorways, room after room, receding in the general direction of Santa Monica, all soaked in rainlight. Genghis Cohen had a touch of summer flu, and his fly was half open as he was wearing, a very Goldwater sweatshirt also. Oedipus felt at once motherly. Okay, what do you guys think about this hallway? Did anything strike you about this? Room within room within room down the hall.
Like an unstoppable search for something.
Unstoppable or perhaps endless?
Endless, yes, that.
If that's what you mean, yeah. Yeah, mystery within mystery, door after door after door. And
I think something like subconscious.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Also, this thing that you never get to the truth, right? You never get to the, I shouldn't say it that way. I should say you never get to the thing in itself, right? You never get all the way in. You're always an observer. You can never not be you, right? So the journey is potentially endless. Another thing that struck me about this is the first thing I thought of when I read the description was that he looks like he's a stamp himself because he's framed, right?
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Slobodanka. Running a bit late. Did you not switch your clock?
Yes, I did. There was something wrong.
Okay.
Something happened.
Okay. So, yeah, I also thought that he looked kind of like a stamp just in the description that they give of him. By the way, oops, hang on. I didn't mean to skip ahead. I'm hitting the right things. Barry Goldwater. Also, there are really a lot of specific references in this book, as we've established already. But he was a conservative, often associated with what's known as the Southern strategy of campaigning. He failed in his bid for the presidency. He was, well, I don't want to go too much into what I think about him personally, just in case he has any fans here with us today. Just look up Barry Goldwater quotes and you'll get the idea. So, in a room perhaps a third of the way along the suite, he sat her in a rocking chair and brought real homemade dandelion wine in a small, neat glass, or in small, neat glasses. Interesting that she says that she felt motherly, and the first thing that happens is she's pampered by him, like he serves her drinks. I picked the dandelions in a cemetery 2 years ago. Now the cemetery is gone. They took it out for the East San Narciso freeway, so there it is again. Remember, that's where the bones came from. So she can't get away from these things. They keep happening. Not only did the bones come from that cemetery, but the wine that she's drinking came from that cemetery. Dandelions are yellow flowers. I don't know what the Serbian word is for those.
Maslačak.
Maslačak. Okay. I thought about trying to make some of this dandelion wine before. It sounds interesting. As soon as she hears this, she has what she describes as something like what feels like the onset of a seizure. She could, at this stage of things, recognize signals like that. So now, her hearing that appears to her as a signal, right? She recognizes the signals. More things are coming in. As the epileptic is said to, an odor, color, pure, piercing grace note announcing his seizure. Yeah. Afterward, it's only the signal. Really, dross. Dross is like nonsense, kind of like, I think of a better synonym than that. Really, the noise, let's say. The signal, this, let's secular announcement. So let's say this is a non-spirit. It's a, why did he use the word secular here? To say that this plain and unsacred, like normal, not normal, that's a better word, typical, this, I can't think of a better synonym or a way to get the idea across. You see, you'll never get to the truth. This secular announcement, that's the thing that's remembered afterwards, not the actual experience. You see, you never get to the truth. The seizure is not what's remembered, but the moments leading up to it. Never what's revealed during the attack. That's not what he remembers. Oedipa wondered whether at the end of this, if it were supposed to end, she too might not be left with only compiled memories of clues. So she gets the feeling that she describes as a person would get as if he or she is about to have a seizure, this sudden like feeling of colors and sounds and smells, because she hears about the cemetery. Yeah, never the central truth itself, which must somehow each time be too bright for her memory to hold, which must always blaze out, destroying its own message irreversibly, leaving an overexposed blank when the ordinary world came back. Did you guys follow this? or if you didn't, I hope I've clarified it. She starts to feel the she starts to feel the paranoia, the darkness, when she starts to hear about this because it keeps happening to her. She can't handle it. Well, actually, she does handle it. Cohen has found some anomalies among the stamps. He shows her swabbing one side of the stamp with benzene. The watermark is on the wrong side of the stamp. She looks, and there it is again, the waste symbol showing up black, a little right of center. So he finds these symbols on the stamps owned by the Inverarity estate. From the same plastic folder, he now tweezed what looked like an old German stamp with figures 1/4 in the center, the word Freimark, I guess it would be at the top, and along the right-hand margin, the legend Thurn and Taxis. Also, if you recall, that's the delivery service from the play and is a real historical delivery service. There was a medieval postal service, Thurn and Taxis in Europe. They were some kind of private couriers, right? From about 1300 until Bismarck brought them out in 1867, Ms. Maas. They were the European mail service. This is one of their very few adhesive stamps, but look in the corners. Tacit lies the gold once knotted horn. That's a line from the play. Just to translate that for you guys. Tacit means quiet, right? So quiet is now the once knotted horn, the gold horn is quiet. Remember, that's the symbol, right? The horn. Then the watermark you found, she said, is nearly the same thing, except for the extra little dewjigger coming out of the bell. It sounds ridiculous, Cohen said, but my guess is it's a mute. So this is what we said at the beginning of this discussion, these discussions. The mute is this object you stick into the mouth of the horn to make it play more quietly. You can also play around with the mute to change the volumes and the sounds. So yes, of course, quiet lies the gold once knotted horn. I can't remember the guy's name in the play who said it. He was the ally of Nicola.
Pascal was his.
Pascal, not that one. Gennaro, I think, the other one who became a general. Was it Gennaro? Pascal, yes, was one of the allies, but then Gennaro is the guy who stood up and said, I will be the regent until
Yes.
Nicola comes back, and he raises some armies. The picture had a Pony Express rider galloping out of a western fort from shrubbery over the right-hand side and possibly in the direction the rider would be heading. Protruded a single painstakingly engraved black feather. Huh. Why put in a deliberate mistake? He asked, ignoring if she saw it, the look on her face, if he saw it. I've come up so far with 8 in all. Each one has an error like this, laboriously worked into the design like a taunt. A taunt is something to provoke you and draw your attention. There's even a transposition that should be 2 words. U.S. pottage of all things. So he found the same, a transposition is switching letters. So pottage instead of postage, that's a transposition. So this is the same one that she found in her letter from Mucho. So she's just becoming continually more paranoid. She told him first about the letter from Mucho, telling her to report all obscene mail to her postmaster. Odd. The transposition, so he looks at a notebook and says, is only on the Lincoln 4-cent regular issue 1954. The other forgeries run back to 1893. That's 70 years. She said he'd have to be pretty old. if it's the same one. And what if it were as old as Thurn and Taxis? Okay. Omidio Tacitus, banished from Milan, organized his first couriers in the Bergamo region around 1290. Okay, so he would be the Taxis in the Taxis and Thurn. So they're trying to figure out the origin of the stamp that, well, she is trying now to figure out the origin of the stamp that was on the letter from Mucho towards the beginning of the story when she first noticed the Potsmaster misprint. He finds similar misprints on stamps in the inverarity stamps that are in the estate. So, mystery upon mystery upon mystery. Whatever it is, he hardly needed to say, they're apparently still quite active. Do we tell the government or what? I'm sure they know more than we do. He sounded nervous. Or suddenly in retreat. No, I wouldn't. This isn't our business, is it? She asked him then about the initials, W-A-S-T-E, but it was somehow too late. She'd lost him. He said no, but so abruptly out of phase now with her own thoughts, he could even have been lying. So maybe he does know something about waste, right? She's not sure. He suddenly doesn't want to talk about it anymore. He pours some more wine. So they're also getting a little bit drunk at the same time. Could be bearing on the situation as well. It's clearer now, he said. He's referring to the wine. He's saying the wine is clearer. A few months ago, it got cloudy. You see, in spring, when the dandelions begin to bloom again, the wine goes through a fermentation, as if they remembered. Okay. No, thought Oedipa, sad, as if their home cemetery in some way still did exist, in a land where you could somehow walk and not need the East San Narciso freeway, and bones still could rest in peace, nourishing ghosts of dandelions. Not one to plow them up, no one to plow them up, as if the dead really do persist even in a bottle of wine. Okay. Well, that's the end of the chapter. Now, what do you guys have to say about what we've read so far? So far, it's still building up. We haven't had huge and final revelations, and I don't think we will. I mean, this theme of not getting all the way to the ultimate and final truth, I predict will bear itself out in the writing. I mean, would there ever be an answer that would totally be satisfactory? Answers in a way are always a little bit disappointing. Mystery ends, and then what? You guys have some comments about this stuff? We will talk more about, I wanted to look more into this entropy in communication theory, because that's a theme. Just to remind you, entropy is the tendency of, okay, broadly speaking, is a tendency of things to dissipate and become chaotic as they spread out, right? To degenerate, a term we heard earlier in reference to that conversation. Yes, Vasily?
Well, Oedipa is becoming more and more paranoid.
She's becoming more paranoid, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and who can blame her? Every time she turns around, something else pops up to push her along this path that she's taken up. It's inescapable, it seems. She's in it now. And you really could picture this done as a kind of film noir detective story, but surreal. I get real, like I said, David Lynch vibes from it sometimes.
Yes, and sorry if I interrupted you, but also the Brilliant Mind. I think that's the name. That's the title of the movie.
About John Nash.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
After that film, this book is much easier to comprehend. Yeah.
I haven't read the book, but I know about John Nash because he came up with game theory. And I don't know if you know about his, like, he almost killed himself. Like, there's stuff that happened after that story because for you guys who aren't familiar with that, if maybe you've seen the film, John Nash was a mathematician, right? Who came up with game theory, and it's related to, if you've heard of the prisoner's dilemma, it basically comes down to, like, if you have the option to stab your friend, like in theory, stab your friends in the back, that person will always win. Now that's a very, very shorthand of way of explaining game theory. The prisoner's dilemma is the one where they say, "Oh, your friend," to the criminal, "your friend is going to turn you in, so you better turn him in first." Um, anyway, John Nash had kind of a, is it John? It's Nash, I know that. Had kind of a mental
John or
break.
George, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it's John. It's Nash, definitely. Yes, and I read
it's
about
Nash.
this. Yeah, it's Nash.
The term is a Nash equilibrium. But yeah. He if you haven't seen the movie, is a guy who started seeing patterns in all kinds of stuff that he looked at, like newspapers, and any piece of information seemed to have coded information hidden inside of it, and it really got to him. And he had a nervous breakdown. There were more after the stories that are covered in that film.
Yes, and I remembered when Nevena asked something about the trauma experience, and I think that was that she was on the right track when she asked that question in the second session, as far as I could remember, because I think that all the time we are inside her mind, and that this is definitely clinical paranoia. So this is not, some allegorical paranoia. I think these are all the symptoms of clinical paranoia.
Yeah, I think my disagreement there was with because Nevena, if I remember right, you were comparing to the previous case. So we did Slaughterhouse 5, in which there's a big question about whether the narrator is experiencing anything or just dealing with the trauma of war in his head. So I think we'd have to maybe expand on the trauma idea. Like, what is the trauma that Oedipa is dealing with in your proposition?
Yes, definitely. We will investigate that.
Yeah, because I don't know. I'm still disinclined to put it in the realm of trauma. I think paranoia, yes. And it's just kind of stepping out of her tower, right? And kind of going on this quest. And it's a quest that can't be ever completely satisfied for anyone in some respect. Like, you never get to the end. And so the paranoia is not the result of trauma, but just kind of making the effort to sort and put everything together, make sense of things, right?
Yes, but I would say her response to trauma, not, of course, it's not the trauma, but it's kind of a response to trauma. In that way, I agree with Nevena's theory to a certain extent, of course. Yeah. I mean, we can say nothing for sure with these kinds of books and movies, and just like with David Lynch, as you mentioned.
There's a lot of stuff in Lynch that's very detective oriented. I mean, putting aside Twin Peaks, which of course is a murder mystery. I mean, this characters
Yeah.
as detectives trying to figure out what's going on with themselves or what happened, you know, like sorting through vague
Yes.
memories and like not really remembering what's going on and not understanding what's happening around them.
I think it's a kind of deconstruction of a detective story, but we'll see.
Sure.
We'll see till the end because I forgot.
Yeah.
What happened afterwards. All of those have to remind myself of the book. So,
I
but
think that's a good way
I
of putting it.
remember. Yeah, I think it was interesting what Neville mentioned because you know it inspired also somehow it triggered ours. I mean, understanding
It
of the book,
inspired you.
and inspired us, yes, but in another direction,
Yeah.
which we didn't take into consideration until that moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, I'm still in the disagree camp, but we'll talk about it more. Yes, Nevena?
I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
We'll discuss it.
How you can explain the Delian vine, the symbol of cemetery, and the connection with the picture in tower, and symbolic on the black clothes and the white clothes of and the symbolic of the bone. What is the connection? Why the narrator used some, how to say, dead symbols? I don't know, the symbols of death. What is the
Well, I can give you my
this connected with trauma and all Oedipa. What is the connection with this Pierce inventory, and what is the?
Okay, that's like 10 questions.
Yes, okay.
Let's start with a couple.
Okay.
Because I don't know if I can answer all of them satisfactorily, and I certainly can't speak to really what the answer is. I can just tell you what I think. And what I think is that let's start with the bones. The bones are there. Okay, this theory is not fully hashed out, but a big part of it is that the bones are there, if you recall, to satisfy the desires, including the sick desires of the guy in the play, but also to satisfy the desires of profit. The sacred, you know, the bones are dug out of the ground and put to the most brutal and grotesque use. You know, that's it, right? And so it's natural that this would be associated with a giant weapons company that's like a huge business in the same town. I mean, they're all in this little circle. The dandelion, I really don't have any theories about the dandelion except for the fact that they were in the graveyard. And remember, the graveyard was also dug up to begin with to make a highway. So it's again this I don't know, like industry and profit motive driving through a graveyard, and they say, well, the graveyard has to go. And well, what are we going to do with these bones? We better do something to profit with them. And it's just this cheapening and degradation of I don't want to sound moralizing and be like, it's a degradation of values and so on, because that would be like what everybody would say, but something along those lines. It's got to be. As far as the clothing, I'm not sure what you were referring to with that.
There is some part that the use of I don't know, some how to say, people who wore the black suit, and the opposite, I don't know, Indians, or what is the meaning? What is they accused black clothes and the
right? Okay, so the mysterious, as of yet unidentified organization, Tristero, seems to have a long history that pops up in historical monuments, stage writing, and other places. I think that we should not have an entirely clear picture of the dark, mysterious, let's say, force of, I mean, evil? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe. There's also something Lynchian in that with there are certain sort of villain characters who seem to have power that doesn't have any gaps. Like they're all powerful. They're untouchable. And I think that that's kind of like what these mysterious figures are, except for the fact that one of them got their finger cut off. That's the only time so far we've heard of them being hurt in any way. But yeah, I think that we're meant to understand that there's a force that's organized underneath everything and behind everything. This, of course, is the paranoia of pareidolia of the face in the bush, right? That there is something in the bush and it's dressed in black and it's been around for a long time and you don't know anything about it and you don't know anything about what motivates it. And that's why it's just there as the villain of the story. I mean, I don't even want to say that. That's very cheap. But there is a dark and mysterious force underneath. And that's what we're meant to understand, I think. I mean, again, I haven't even gotten all the way through the book yet. So.
Yes, maybe all this, how to say, cemetery symbols and the black clothes, maybe some, how to say, devastating and humiliated values of this secret Tristero. And Tristero is some kind of, how to say, symbol of trauma. And this cemetery symbol just helped to emphasize this, how to say, dark side of this trauma, and the Tristero like a secret organization, like a connection with this Oedipa world, secret world.
Okay.
Maybe something like that.
Yeah. You're saying that the Tristero assassins are a symbol of trauma. I mean, they certainly inflict trauma. I mean, trauma, I'm trying to think of a good, so, because there are lots of ways you can talk about trauma, and I'm like immediately slipping into this like psychoanalysis mode where it's like trauma is the return of the real. But that's not necessarily what, or is it? I don't know. I have to think about it some, to be honest. I have to think about it. I we'll have to think about it more, especially after we finish reading the book. That's a big part of it. As of now, it's just a mysterious a force that may represent trauma. I don't know. I'm a little bit hesitant to try to put it into such a just like this one-to-one relationship kind of thing, but I guess I kind of did that already with my speculation on the profit motive and so on. I mean, I would say that the Tristero group are probably, I mean, like, it's not that they have bad values, it's they have no kind of values. They just operate and do whatever is necessary. In the same way that a weapons manufacturer does, you know, they do what they do without consideration to the results of their actions. I don't know. I'm really kind of thinking too far ahead at this point, I think,
and
about it.
When you told that Tristero is some kind to back in the reality, that reminds me like in this pandemic situation, new reopen or something, how every people is some kind of unrealistic Tristero, and we must going back, like Tristero will be a deeper back in new reality, maybe new reopen on the mind, if in the real connection with those men she lost in this, how to say, traumatic plot of the novel. Some kind of reopen of the deeper mind.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of her quest is to open her mind. Her quest is to get out of the tower. And so there's a certain amount of rending of the veils, you know, smashing up her previous symbolic reality to try to get into a new one. And that's certainly a traumatic process. And it does involve this kind of like the return of the real. I don't know. we will continue to discuss it in any case. So that's it for now. I think I forgot to put the last slide on here, unfortunately. So I don't have the end, but next week, chapter 5. Yes, Vasilia?
Some about John Nash is a beautiful mind.
About what?
About John Nash
About John Nash, yes?
is a beautiful mind.
Yes, The Beautiful Mind. Yeah, we were talking about that because look, that's his story is a great illustration of apophenia. Um, and yeah, it is. Like sometimes apophenia is a pleasant, creative, inspiring process. You can get ideas by trying to connect things. Have you guys ever heard of a website, if it's still around, called it's called Dubious Correlations? I think that's what it's called, anyway, if I remember correctly. What this guy does, he's a statistician, and he has a bunch of data banks that you can correlate, and the website will generate correlations for these ridiculous data banks. And his whole point is that correlation doesn't mean causation, but you can find lots of data that correlate but mean absolutely nothing. Like, for example, the number of movies released in 1 year by Nicolas Cage, with Nicolas Cage in them, correlates to the number of people who accidentally strangle themselves in their sheets in bed in 1 year over a period. And then they show the data in a chart and it correlates. Now, my whole point of bringing that up is that he does that to show you, like, look, all kinds of data correlate and it doesn't mean anything, but it's fun to go through those charts and try to think of a story that would correlate those data. Like, how on earth is it possible that the number of Nicolas Cage movies relates to some ridiculous, like, people who choke on like cheese, or like there are ridiculous statistics in there. And so you try to come up with a story in your head to draw the line between the two events. Actually, more events would have to be involved. It can't be a straight line, so you wind up coming up with interesting stories. So that's apophenia also in a non-paranoid setting. Yeah, and particularly creative people can be certainly more susceptible to feeling attacked by the appearance of those connections between things. Maybe this small gesture made by this person means this, and it's because of that, and therefore I have a reason to be afraid, or I keep seeing this I keep seeing this weird symbol around. Why does it keep popping up in my life? Something must be going on. We don't have time to get into it right now, but I want to recommend, if you haven't seen the movie I Heart Huckabees, it's about how things may or may not be connected. It's a silly little like philosophical comedy movie.
Which movie?
Called I
Can
Heart.
you write that the
Yeah.
title in the comment?
It's a part of the plot is that there's a detective agency that investigates your coincidences to figure out if they mean anything. I Heart. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
I Heart Huckabees. Yeah, there's a detective agency that will investigate your coincidences if they're blowing you away too much. And so you can figure out if it means anything, but they're really invasive, and they'll follow you around, and they go through your trash, and they just invade your life. And the guy can't deal with the fact that these people are following him around all the time. And so he like freaks out. I don't want to give away the plot, but it's quite good. It's pretty lighthearted, and it's got some good, I'd say, related content to this, because there is something about like whether things are connected or not and how you can look at the world. Like some would say that there's no connections, that there are no connections, that things just happen and it's all chaos. While others would say that things are connected and everything's connected and it's all order. And it's a comedy about that. Okay, so in that case, I'll see you guys next Sunday, I hope. Chapter 5, same time. All right.
Okay.
And if you have anything you'd like to contribute, feel free to email me as always. All right. See you guys next time.
Thanks, Jason.
Bye.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye bye.
everyone.